Daan van Rossum. He's the Future of Work CEO, and he's also the founder and CEO at FlexOS. I'm curious about the fact that you have raised $1 million from VCs and angels, and pivoting from a tech-driven company to a content or media-driven company, right?
And the pivot basically came when we saw actually a lot of traction around the content we were putting out, and not so much the technology that we were trying to sell with.
What do you think about the future of work?
So number one, I think a lot of people are already using AI. So what they see is it makes them a lot more productive, right? So now we can go and talk about things like 4-day work week, maybe 3-day work week, right? All the things that you were spending your time on average 40-50% of our time at work is spent on emailing, reporting, maybe researching, meeting, and all that work can be done with AI.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Zero to X. I'm Ruby Nguyen, host of Zero to X. I'm also founder at Curious. And today I'm having with me a dear friend and an entrepreneur that I greatly admire, Daan van Rossum. He's the Future of Work CEO, a LinkedIn top voice, a New York Times, Harvard Business Review economist, CNBC insider, Fast Go Future founder. And he's also the founder and CEO at FlexOS. Also a writer and a podcast host. Wow, so many talent. I'm not sure there's anything that he can't do. Also, a fun fact, Dan has been in Vietnam for 9 years, and I've been knowing him for a long time. I feel like he's a half Vietnamese in spirit. So welcome, Dan. Welcome back to my podcast. We've done other episodes before, and would love to hear about your vision for the future of work, because you're an expert and a thought leader in this field. And I also would love to chat to you a little bit about your pivot journey as a founder. Like as founder, we have done many pivots in our entrepreneurship journey, and very few people talk about it. And so today, tell us about that journey.
What do you want to talk about in terms of, hello, thank you for having me. What do you want to talk about in terms of that?
Um, okay, so what was the problem you were solving in the beginning of your journey? And then why did you decide to pivot?
Yeah, I mean, I think life generally is one big journey of pivots, right? Like you constantly think that you know who you are and what you want from life, and then things change and then you have to pivot, right? So I don't think it's that kind of big of a topic or that difficult. But basically within the company, we spun, as you know, out of Dreamplex. We saw that in our co-working spaces that the kind of element of bringing people together, bringing communities together was a really big and important part of why people want to go to an office. And then as the move towards hybrid work, meaning less time in the office, more time at work was happening, we realized that we needed to keep that going, even if people were not there. And we saw a couple of examples of platforms, software platforms in other countries that basically were trying to solve for that problem. But we thought that we could do it better, and we thought we could do it better for Southeast Asia. So basically, we fundraised to build a tech platform focused on kind of like keeping people together in kind of hybrid work environments. And we pitched that, we fundraised for it, we closed $1 million seed round, and then basically we started really building it. And the pivot basically came when we realized that our original hypothesis wasn't really right. And I don't think that we could have really foreseen it at that point in time. But basically the idea that everyone in Southeast Asia was going to work in a hybrid fashion turned out totally not true. So actually in Southeast Asia, it turns out that yes, there are markets like Singapore where actually people are still predominantly either hybrid or remote. But there are also many markets like, for example, Vietnam, where the moment that COVID was kind of over and the offices could reopen, the companies just said, hey, guys, let's go back 5 days a week. And so that whole idea of, people having flexibility and freedom of when and where to work was kind of taken away overnight. And so therefore, like we needed to switch quite quickly and quite early on. And basically, we had two paths. We could either stick with the problem solution space, but pivot towards another market, or we could basically choose the same market, meaning Southeast Asia, but choose a new problem and solution. And so we basically decided eventually, after testing out a bunch of things, to do both. We we decided to take a new problem and solution and also a new market because we saw actually through the podcast you mentioned before and through the content that you mentioned before, we saw actually a lot of traction around the content we were putting out and not so much the technology that we were trying to sell with the content. So we actually ended up deciding to focus fully on the content and not so much on the technology. And that's where we are today.
And so I'm curious about the fact that you have raised $1 million from VCs and angels, and pivoting from a tech-driven company to a content or media-driven company, right? So how did you get your stakeholders on board?
It was a not really kind of like a black and white process. I think that what we really did, and Jonah Levy, who is my co-founder, who you also know very well, he advised me a lot on this and really tried to make it a very kind of organic process where it really isn't from, we go from one thing to another, but kind of make logical small steps and keeping everyone in the loop. So he has always been the one to advise me that we should really focus on keeping everyone updated, all of our investors updated on a monthly basis, no matter whether there is good news or bad news or no news. Keep everyone updated, make them kind of aware of everything that's happening in the company, and kind of take them on that journey. And the same thing with the board, who some of our investors are on the board as well. Basically, instead of like going from like 0 to 1 to another kind of solution space overnight, really make it more of like an ongoing series of discussions where we involve everyone and kind of present the options that we have and ask for inputs and really make everyone feel that they're a part of the decision, which eventually, because of everyone's support from kind of like from that very first moment that we realized this may not be the right direction, we got a lot of buy-in to basically explore other options and then eventually to choose one of those options as the final thing. So it's not really kind of like overnight telling people that we're going to do something differently, but make it very much a collaboration between all the partners involved in this project.
Oh wow, that's a very nice way to do it. At the same time, I'm still wondering because um, I've heard I was in media before, and I've heard many times that media is not so VC backable, right? And you have VCs on your cap table. How do they how does it come to terms with this is I'm not sure if you still label yourself as a VC backable company anymore, but how did they come to terms with that when you do a pivot that now the model can be in a gray area whether it's VC backable or not?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that, founders from the beginning have to really think about, right? Is the company that I want to start, is this something that I'm doing because I'm really passionate about what I'm doing and I want to do this no matter what? Or am I really going for scale and fame and money? And then you need VCs to be involved, right? And so for me, like from the beginning, it was always about trying to fix something that I see as wrong in the way that we work today, right? And so because from the beginning we communicated that mission, the mission didn't really change, even though we changed kind of like the problem and the solution in particular, but the mission didn't really change. And so when we're thinking about like how did the investors, like how did our partners feel about the company no longer being like a sec tech company, but basically being now more of like a media company, I think we have to kind of remember that we're on that journey anyway, right? So basically the money has been invested, the machine is going. What are basically the options, right? And I think everyone, again, this was a series of conversations and not really just me saying, I want to do something different, but this is really a series of conversations and really a collaboration with all the stakeholders to say, look, these are our options. Like, of course, we can say, okay, the tech thing didn't work out. Let's basically pull the plug and maybe give people back some of the money. But then what will be the point in that, right? Or can we go for something that we have some idea and some initial traction that it actually could work out? So maybe it will not end up at a tech multiple exit, which is, of course, what the VCs from the beginning, that was the point, that was the idea. But even at a lower kind of like multiple valuation, like you would have in media, is still better than ending up with nothing, right? And I think one other thing, and this is not necessarily related to necessarily our investors, but generally we have to also remember that the whole VC game is placing a series of bets, and you basically know as a VC that 9 out of 10 of your bets are not going to work out. right? So again, this is baked into the model. I just think that basically we were early enough to not kind of like go blind, stick your head in the sand, keep continuing on something that we all kind of could see objectively was not going to work out, but say, can we give this capital that we've invested in everything up until now, can we almost give it a second life and take people on that journey with us? And that's basically what we've done. And I'm not saying it's always been easy or that there was no protest whatsoever or that everyone was super happy about the fact that we changed course. But I still think it's much better than the alternative, which was basically to burn out and mark this one as, okay, that company went bankrupt and, we have nothing. Yeah, I mean, product market fit is something that I've kind of had to learn the hard way over time. And No, but I would say that when we look into the space, and again, the part of what the capital was invested in obviously was for us to discover the space much more deeply and understand much better what the actual challenges were that people were facing. And actually, what we found is that there are already a lot of solutions out there. And I think again, like not to make this like one big warning story for other founders, but a lot of the times we're kind of like really kind of rose-colored glasses. We think we have a brilliant idea. We do some quote unquote market research, but all that the market research is basically just us validating our own idea, right? We do maybe competitive research, but we don't go too deep because then we may find something that actually competes with us, right? Or we do like focus group or testing, but we basically ask people like, hey, don't you think this is a great idea? Would you be interested? And then we say 9 out of 10 people told us that they're interested. Right. So of course everyone falls into the same traps, right? And everyone obviously has to learn through experience. I'm sure people could have warned us as well. So basically, we go back and we realize that there really is still that same problem to solve, which is that as companies evolve, as the world of work is evolving, of course, there will be a role for technology to solve some of those challenges, right? And that is hybrid and remote work is one. I think fractional work is a really a big other one. AI, obviously, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is another really big pillar of how work is transforming very quickly. It doesn't necessarily mean that the best role that we can play is to develop our own technology, especially because our strength is more in content and building audiences and building community, right? So the product market fit for us is basically now to say we can reach the people that are trying to find solutions to the way that organizations are changing and to the way that the world of work is changing. But instead of like selling our own solution, we basically just introduce them to other people who have great solutions. And yes, we take commission as part of that introduction. And that's how we can make money and that's how it can be a good model.
So congratulations on the pivot. It seems that you're a much happy founder, much more productive. You found your path. Um, is that right? Is my reading right? Can you tell me a little bit more about how you feel and what your vision is for this new future of your company?
Yeah, sure. No, the reading is definitely right. I'm definitely a lot happier, and I think that that is really the process. And again, sometimes you can read all the advice and you can hear people tell you what you should be doing, but sometimes you just have to kind of experience the pain firsthand. I have a 3-year-old, so I see this day to day that people have to kind of like hurt, and then they can find the right solution. They can kind of like avoid the problem, but. Yeah, I'm definitely like much happier, mostly just because I went back to A, what am I really passionate about? And also B, where are my current strengths already? Like, where can I have some kind of an unfair advantage? And by bringing those together, the work feels a lot less like work. And
Mm,
another like really big learning in that whole process is that like, even if I'm very passionate about something and I would love to inspire other people to go on that journey with me, like again, the moment that you have to deliver skill and you have to deliver growth, you're actually going to be much more in the mode of managing rather than really working in the company yourself. So you end up spending a lot of time on hiring, spending a lot of time on managing, spending a lot of time on problem solving, and not in the fun way, right? So
mm,
now that I'm scaled down and I have a much smaller team and people that I've loved working with for years now, all of that also feels a lot less like work. So therefore, right, the time that we spend working is a lot more kind of fun and interesting. And therefore, like my main learning that I'm always trying to share is just like really start just for yourself, and I just finished the coaching call, like just really for yourself as a founder, go
Mm,
back to why am I starting this? And kind of be like a 5 year old where you keep asking why, because the first why that you're going to answer is not the real one. Because the first one is going to be like, oh, because like I think this problem needs to be solved, blah, blah. It's like, but why are you pursuing that? And usually it's something like you have a chip on your shoulder, you want to prove the world wrong, people have misjudged you before, or maybe you just really want fame or you really want money or whatever it is. But really, really understand your own core motivation. Because if you understand why you do it, it's so much easier to build the whole model around it and make really smart decisions in how you approach it. So
mm.
that's really my main learning is that, and why I'm much happier now, because at the end of the day, I'm doing what I like doing and what I'm good at.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing, Dan. Usually we talk about business and entrepreneurship. We talk about the intellectual matters, right? How you build product, how you do customer development, and all that things. But very few of us actually open the conversation and talk about the emotional connection that we have with what we do. And recently I listened to a podcast interviewing the CEO of Airbnb, and
Mhm.
he was talking about being a multi-billionaire and feeling lonely and desperate in his office.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I listened to that podcast and I decided to myself, I'm not gonna do that as a founder. I'm not gonna just chase success and fame and whatever it is, and then lose my life in that process, years of my life in that process. So I'm very happy to hear your story, and you seem to be a very happy entrepreneur and happy father and husband, and I'm really happy for you. At the same time, recently, personally for me, with my company, I also found much deeper level of connection to what I do.
Mm,
I found a new love for what I do. Yes,
nice.
so
That's good.
I'll share with you and other people on the podcast another time because this is your time. But I just want to say that I hear and I connect to what you're saying. That as entrepreneur, we gotta find the reason why really deeply and connect to it deeply, not just intellectually, not just making money, being famous, showing the world how 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 cool, how smart we are, right?
And
Yeah,
especially because I think what we have learned through all the research that's out there right now
yeah,
about true happiness, about true human flourishing, right?
yeah, yeah.
It's that the idea of once I hit that, once I achieve that, once I resolve that, then I will be happy, right? That feeling of like, I need to get there, then I will be happy. All the research, and probably just talk to any 80-year-old and they would tell you too, or talk to Brian Chesky from Airbnb, they will tell you
Yeah,
too. Everything is saying that that is just not the case,
yeah,
right? Because we keep moving the goalpost, right? Because if we think we need 5 million to be happy, then once we hit 5 million, we need 10 million, right?
right.
If we think that
Yeah,
we want fame, then we become famous. We want to be more famous, right?
yeah,
If
yeah.
we keep looking at something as the goal to be happy, we keep kind of like pursuing that. We keep shifting that goalpost. And that's this
Mm,
concept of the hedonic treadmill, right? Where you're on this treadmill and you're never going anywhere. You just keep going on the treadmill. You just keep running and you're not
yeah,
really running towards something that actually is an actual goal because
yeah,
that goal is not the thing that's going to make you happy, right? And so
right.
what people find usually later in life is that the things that make you happy, they're already here in the here and
Mm,
now, right? Like
mm,
everything you need to be happy is already here because when you wake up in the morning, you can see and you can breathe and you're here on this earth, right? And
yeah,
you hopefully have some people around you that you really love. And hopefully you can then do something with the time here that you enjoy doing. So everything that can make you happy and that will make you happy is already here. And if you can build from there and say, okay, and on top of that, I would also love to spend my time meaningfully and to maybe contribute something positive to the world. And I want to do that through a startup, which is fine. It
mm,
could also be
mm,
working for a charity. It could be doing a side project. It could just be a normal full-time job. Like no matter what
mm.
it is, if you feel that that provides additional meaning, then that's great. But if you
Yep.
do it just to achieve something, you will be bitterly disappointed because I will tell you the moment you achieve it, you will come up with a new thing you
Yeah,
want to achieve.
yeah, yeah. Um, this is so interesting. Brian Pell's one of our mutual friends as well. He's the
Hmm.
founder of ex-founder of VNG and now founder of bootloader studio. And so we were talking about this on his podcast as well. I mean, on one of our podcast episodes, and he was like, I think all founders need to go to therapy
Of
to
course.
find out to find out
Yes.
what is it that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yes, you're
But not
right.
just founders, right? This is true for everyone,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Like
true.
even if you're just in a normal corporate career,
Yeah.
you're always looking up to the next rank that you want to achieve, the next title that you want to get, the next salary level that you want to get, right?
Hmm.
Even outside of that, right? You're always comparing, you're always looking at other
Yes.
people, you're always
Yes.
looking at what other people have, and you say, I want that. And I think Charlie Munger's famous quote is that, people are not driven by greed, people are driven by envy. It's not that
Yes.
we want things, it's that we
Yeah.
want things that other people don't have. Right.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
want to feel that we're higher or better than other people. And as long as we
Yeah.
keep pursuing that, we keep in this kind of trap of like, okay, you're going to keep running. But the moment that you achieve that, then you look up to other people and you want to achieve what they have. Right. So it just
Yeah.
never ends. And that's why,
Mm.
later on you realize that,
Yeah.
that doesn't work. But it doesn't mean that people don't have to learn this through experience and find it out the hard
Yeah.
way. Go and find it out the hard way. It's fine.
I think we have to find it out the hard way. I just hope that it's not too hard that it break the person down to
Right.
pieces.
Very good. Very
But
good. Yeah.
I think we all have to find it out the hard way so we can actually learn the lesson. I think this is not a lesson
Exactly.
that can be intellectualized. It's a lesson that you have to experience.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, success is just like chewing gum. Right? It's sweet
Mm.
for a few moments, and after that it becomes just blah, right? And then there's always the next gum to chew, and there's our peer group, there's always someone who's more successful, more famous, raise more money, do whatever more things that is more cool. There's always people in the world.
Yeah.
Because right now we're looking outside to the world. We're not just comparing ourselves to the people who we know personally anymore. We compare ourselves to all the other people on earth.
Hmm.
And that comparison is just so bad if we don't learn how to deeply connect with the reason why that we do, and um, yeah, and live life truly meaningful to our 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 hearts.
There you
Um,
go.
I'm
That's
so
it.
glad that we talked about this conversation,
The
right?
end.
I didn't I didn't plan to talk about this agenda, but I love this. Yeah, yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Chào những khán giả của Zero to X. Mình muốn dành một chút thời gian để cảm ơn Workflow, nhà tài trợ của tập podcast ngày hôm nay. Đội ngũ của mình tại Curious cũng đang sử dụng không gian tại Workflow để làm việc hybrid. Cả đội rất yêu thích kiến trúc hiện đại, đồ ăn ngon và những ly cà phê đầy tính sáng tạo ở đây. Điều tuyệt vời nhất là bạn có thể đăng ký sử dụng không gian linh hoạt với chi phí rất là kinh tế. Nếu bạn đang tìm kiếm một không gian làm việc hybrid cho bản thân hoặc cho đội ngũ nhỏ của mình tại thành phố Hồ Chí Minh thì hãy thử Workflow nhé. Nếu bạn thích chương trình này thì tại sao không mua tặng tụi mình một ly cà phê? Hãy nhấn vào link ở trong description nhé.
Now let's talk about the future of work, right? This is a topic that you're passionate about. You've been writing about it, sending emails out, newsletter out. I receive 2 of your newsletter every week. I'm like, how do you have so much time to write 2 newsletter every week? But yeah, I've read some of them. I haven't read all of them. But today I want to learn more about what you think about the future of work. And of course, when we talk about this topic, we cannot skip the AI topic. So first, let's talk about that, right?
Sure.
AI. Yeah.
Sure.
So what's the state of play for AI in the workplace from your point of view?
So basically, like I look at really 3 kind of main pillars for how the future of work will look very different than current way of working, and especially a couple years ago, right? So AI you mentioned already. Obviously, remote work is another one where we can have these kind of conversations. We can work together no matter where we are. And the third one is going to be fractional work and kind of like skill-based work, right? So the idea of kind of like going into a career and having a full-time job and just going to an office and sit there 9 to 5 for 40 years, that is really slowly fading away.
Mm.
So we can definitely start by AI. We released some research on the topic. I'm just gonna look at my note. So we did some research last year, right? And we looked at AI in the workplace, and we asked, in this case, 200 US-based knowledge workers, are you currently using AI? How do you use AI? What are the benefits, right? So number one, I think a lot of people are already using AI. So even though companies are kind of slower to adapt, people individually are already working with AI. So actually 71% of Gen Z and millennials already are using generative AI. And that was in October last year. So now 3 months later, maybe totally different, right? Will definitely be more. The second thing is that, like, what is really the main benefit, right? So the main benefit for people who actually are now actively using AI is that actually what they see is it makes them a lot more productive, right? So now we can go and talk about things like 4-day work week, maybe 3-day work week, right? Because basically all the things that you were spending your time on average 40, 50% of our time at work is spent on emailing, reporting, maybe researching, meeting, and all that work can be done with AI. So the number one way that people kind of find benefit from AI is that it makes them a lot more productive. Specifically, it cuts out all the menial admin work that we hate doing anyway. And the
No one
third
likes
part
that.
is really, and no one likes that, right? And
Mhm.
and BCG has done some really good research on
Mm.
how joyful you feel about your work. That actually correlates directly with retention. So you're going to stay longer at a company where you feel that you have joy in your work, and joy comes from affiliation work or contribution work, not from admin work.
Yep.
And the third one is basically, okay, so what do people use Gen AI for at work, right? So we obviously hear a lot about like ChatGPT, create some poem, write me an email, whatever, right? Or we hear about like DALI and create some images. But actually, for most people, it's really email and communication. So people who actively use it, they go through their inbox much faster because AI can summarize basically what are all the things that are most urgent out of the 300 emails that you have waiting for you in the morning, right? Data analysis and reporting is another really big one, right? So if you have a big data set, AI can basically now help you to get the data, the insights out of it that you need, right? Then there is some content, but it's much smaller. It's a much smaller segment, but there's some content creation as well. And then there is basically like design tasks, right? So maybe creating visuals, that kind of stuff. So what you really see is that like AI is probably much more adopted than what people really think, because you just hear a lot more on the company level. And B, people use it differently than what most people think. And this is where I think it becomes very relevant for our conversation, because again, this is a sample of knowledge workers in the US who have really taken to it by storm. And my fear is that, especially here, that people are really going to fall behind because labor is pretty affordable here. And people don't really see the need to adopt AI because it's like, oh, yeah, like I have a lot of people doing busy work, doing admin work at my company, doing manual reporting, manual data analysis, all that kind of stuff. But it's okay. They're only 10 million per month, 50 million per month, 20 million per month, right? And if we don't catch up quickly, we're going to fall behind tremendously.
So the labor is cheap, but managing people is always painful. So that's always the pain of managing people, right?
It
That
is.
that
It is,
will
but
make
then you
them
have to
realize
think
that
about,
it's replaceable. A lot of the tasks is replaceable by AI.
but then you have to think about, okay, like we're talking as founders with small companies, right? But then think about larger companies, right? Like maybe if you're a founder building software for a larger company, you have to think about like that mentality, right?
Yeah.
Like who is the most disincentivized to push AI is all the managers, because they can extrapolate from what's happening today. They can see their job is going to go away. You don't need managers in the future, right? AI is the best manager in the world. If it comes down something big that the company wants to achieve and breaking it down to the smaller tasks that all the individual team members want or need to do, you don't need managers for that, right? So the very people that could push this obviously are going to be the ones that are most against it, right? And so that's where the incentives play a big role.
Yeah, I see the point. Yeah. Dan, I know we've been talking before. We talked about the dream of building a scalable, profitable company with just a few people on the team, right? We talk about this as friends, a coffee talk. Oh, we just want to build a few people team and have maybe millions of dollars in revenue. That's that kind of story. Tell us a little bit more about that dream and how it's
Hmm.
realizing for you. How
Hmm.
it is manifesting in your reality.
Yeah, so this is definitely reality for me. Obviously, we create our own realities as founders, so that's the good thing, right? We can pursue something that we want to do. But I think this is going back to your previous point, Ruby, about the difficulty of managing and the complexity of managing, right? And that, like, maybe really early on, a lot of founders, like you will ask, how are you doing? And like, I'm doing really well. And they will mention either revenue or employees, right? I
Yeah.
have this size of team or I have this much revenue. And usually people earlier stage will say like, we have like 20 people already, right? We're growing like crazy. We have to switch office space, all that, right?
Yeah.
And what people kind of don't see in that is that like, yeah, but that's actually not a good thing, right? Because like the more people you add, the slower you're going to run. That's just the law of things, right? The more people you're going to have in your company, the harder it's going to be to run it, the harder it's going to be to innovate, the harder it's going to be to achieve that dream that you had, right? So I think previously there wasn't really that much to do. You could train people to be more productive. You could train managers to be better managers, leaders to be better leaders. But now there actually is that like seismic change because now you can actually use AI to do a lot of the work that people were previously doing. And because of that, you can basically have a small team that achieves a lot, right? So Ben Parr and others that basically have predicted that we will see the first 3-person unicorn within the next few years. And that is really possible now because all the tasks that previously you needed people for, basically AI can do it, right? Like all the key things that you would need to build a product and grow a product. You have Copilot, you have AI itself, and you can basically get that done either by yourself or with much smaller teams. So I think the real call to action here is to say, first of all, stop talking about full-time jobs. This doesn't make any sense. First of all, no one new and young in the workforce right now, no Gen Zer wants a full-time job. That no matter what they say, they don't want a full-time job. They don't want to like just have one thing and do that for, for like 40 hours a week and for years, right? Stop talking about full-time jobs. It doesn't work. You really have to think about what are the things that I need to get done to get to my success, right? So whatever is the goal for this year or whatever, what needs to get done in order to achieve that, right? You can break that down to projects, you can break that down to tasks. And previously we would basically then say, okay, let's bundle a bunch of those tasks, let's write a job description and let's hire a blah 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 blah, right? That doesn't make any sense anymore. It doesn't make any sense anymore because you're way better off getting 5 people who are individually really good at their one single thing rather than one person who is a little bit good at everything. Besides the founder, obviously, we can still do that. Because you have fractional talent, you have talent marketplaces, right? It doesn't make any sense to hire someone, let's say in marketing, who both has to do a podcast and has to be a good content writer and has to understand social media, because you can hire all those people individually probably at the same rate.
You know what, Dan?
Exactly,
that's exactly what I'm doing.
And that's the new model. That's why we talk about it a lot, right?
Yeah.
And then second part is that 40-50% of those tasks can now be done by AI. So you have to really imagine, first of all, don't think about roles, think about tasks. And then you think about who am I going to give those tasks to? And probably in 1 or 2 out of 3 cases, it can go to an AI. And if it cannot go to AI today, it can definitely go to AI within 6 to 12 months, right? And so when we think about the company of the future, they will be smaller, they will be leaner, and they will be a lot more fun to work in because you're working with a small group of people that are all doing a lot of like really interesting work, that all have the joy of working from wherever and whenever they want. They're way more motivated, they're way more excited, and you do this great thing together. So to me, that's really where we're going, where we must be going.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I see that future is coming. And I see that manifesting in what I do as well. As a founder, you have the privilege of choosing who you want to work with, and you want to work with people who bring you joy and who you respect and you can learn from, and that team of people, your small community. So, so those are relationship that is meaningful. So when you go to work, you find fun and joy and meaning as well. Not just like, hey, this is a transaction and we just work, right? I love that future, and I hope that future is going to come soon for everyone. So let's talk a little bit about remote work, right? You mentioned earlier you had a big hypothesis that remote work is going to be the future during the COVID time. What is your position now, and how do you see it playing out in the future?
So first of all, I still think that remote work should be the norm. It's definitely not happening in Vietnam. It's definitely not happening in the region fully yet. If we look at other markets like the US, basically, remote work was about 5% of all working days before the pandemic, right? Right now, it's 1 in 3 working days are done remotely. and 15% of all the work in the US is basically fully remote. So that is like an insane shift from just a few years ago until now. And I think that the more that companies get used to this, the more that they will understand that this is like a total win-win. It doesn't make any sense to tell people to spend time, to spend money, to spend energy, to commute to an office, to then basically sit behind their computer to do the very same work that you could just do by opening up your laptop, right?
Yes.
And we had a discussion about recording this podcast, right? And we said, okay, maybe we can meet in person, like you've done with some other people, and sit somewhere. I'm like, that's extra time. That's extra money. That's extra effort, basically for the same output as that we're doing it online right now. Right. And so basically, you're seeing now the shift of companies starting to see that the people that work remotely actually contribute in the same way or better than people who are sitting in the office for the simple fact that, again, those people are just happier. They're just happier employees because they have the agency and the autonomy to choose when and where they can do their best work. And offices are typically a terrible place to do work if it comes to focus work, if it comes to deeply productive work where I sit down and write a really great point of view, or where I create a presentation, or where I can create creative ideas, right?
Mm.
That is not something that you want to do sitting behind your desk with colleagues talking around you, all that kind of stuff. Now, the reason why fully remote doesn't always work, in my opinion, is that a lot of people still want to feel some sense of connection, right? And not
Yes.
all
Yeah.
companies are good at building that culture and building that connection with people fully remotely, right? So therefore, it makes total sense to get people to come in from time to time, and let them collaborate, socialize, build connection, recharge. I think the question that companies mostly are trying to figure out right now, because the idea of full-time office is definitely gone. Like no one would do that anymore. But what companies really are trying to figure out right now in the US and Europe is like, what's that balance? What's the balance between the time you spend working from home and the time that you spend working in an office, right? And I think that's really the next couple of years will be around experimentation, figuring it out, right?
Mm.
What works in one industry doesn't work in another. We cannot copy what these really cool tech companies are doing and say, okay, now JP Morgan Chase, you have to do it too, right? That doesn't work. So we have to find what is the balance, but a balance between some time working from home where you can be fully focused or where you can take a bunch of calls without being interrupted and some time with other people is definitely something that all companies are going to go for. And again, should go for, because like total win-win. Who wants to piss off their employees in mandating people to come to work to a certain place and to work at a certain time in a certain way?
That's awesome. I think we just like singing music to each other's ears, so I'm always agreeing with you. That's bad. I want to argue with
Terrible
you
podcast.
something on something. Yeah, I'm terrible podcast host. I should challenge you. But yeah, but I'm agreeing with you. So what's the point? So what is holding companies back from making the move to remote? What caused
I,
the failed experiment? Right? COVID forced everyone go into
yeah,
that experiment, right? And then it didn't work. So what's
yeah.
the reason?
So simple. So it's so simple, and it's going to be something that people, when they hear it, they're like, oh, of course, that makes sense. It's something that someone coined as executive nostalgia, which is
Mhm.
basically I, as an executive, let's say 45, 50-year-old white male, I have a warm and fuzzy memory of going to the office. I also remember how painful it was in my early career that I had to get into the car and drive to an office and sit there for like 60 hours a week, right? That's how I grew up. So, with that nostalgia in mind, it's not that crazy for those same executives to basically wait until offices can open again and then say, okay, guys, we can go back to the office. Oh, you want to work from home? Okay, I'll make a compromise with you. You can work from home 1 day a week or 2 days per week. But the whole reason that companies are not going back, to a much more hybrid or a much more remote model is simply because that's not what the people in charge are used to. So one proof point, very simple. Look at the new startups. Look at the new startups in San Francisco. 80, 90% are remote from the first day because those young founders, they don't have that nostalgia. They don't have that warm, fuzzy memory of, oh, it was so fun to be in an office together. So when they think about what's best for their team, they know what's best for the team because they are like them. But in most companies, there's a huge gap between most of the employees and the senior leadership. And the senior leadership have very different kind of perspectives on what's good. But at the end of the day, and that's obviously why you do see companies make a change, at the end of the day, those companies still have to remain attractive for Gen Z and millennial talents. If they have a terrible value proposition as a company for those young talents, and the young talents are going to drive the innovation, they're going to understand the consumer, they're going to understand who they're selling to, right? If they want to attract those people, they have to give something of value in return. They have to think about company employee fit. They have to think about, what can I give to you that makes it worth for you, who could join a cool startup or who could do something really interesting, to join me as this older company. And that's why you still see that the companies are making adjustments and trying to figure out, again, how can we make it work for everyone?
Yeah, I've just today learned about that term, executive nostalgia. That's a
I
new
love it.
term for
Yeah.
me to learn today. That is such a good term. Do you think that those executives need to change to be able to make this change in the remote work? And from a personal point of view, it's very intuitive for me to go hybrid, right? I love
Yeah.
working hybrid. I work when I recently I made a trip to the US, and I find that working there, I'm actually not more productive, even though I'm so far away. So it's very
Hmm.
intuitive for us, people who are native or we just bought into this
Hmm.
um, kind of natively. But for people who, like you said, right, executive in their 50s, maybe 40s, they're already so used to the old way of running companies and businesses.
Yeah.
Would they have to change for this business world to change?
Well, this is basically the innovator's dilemma, right? It's like, do you
Mm.
want to be Kodak or do you want to be Instagram, right? What is the cost of not adapting to what younger employees want? And again, like we're talking about, because it just happens to be my field, but we are talking about like big companies in the US. But again, we have to bring this back home as well. Every decision you make as a founder, everything that you design in terms of like, what is it like to work for me, and where does that work happen, and when does that work happen? All these decisions are going to make it either attractive for people to join your company and stay at your company, or it's going to make it really unattractive, right? And so at the end of the day, the incentives for executives are to make sure that the company is profitable and that they're competitive in the marketplace. And that means you have to drive innovation and that you have to be, creating new things. So the only way to do that is to hire those really talented young people, right? And so if they want to attract those people, they have to offer some of that. That's the only reason. Because if you look at the CEO surveys, if you look at the research, if it was up to the CEOs, everyone would be back to the office. The only reason they're not is because the talent would vote with their feet. They would say, then I will just go somewhere else, right? If that's what you're mandating,
Yeah.
then I will go somewhere else. So wherever that power dynamic is that way, you will see that same thing playing out. So again, I
Mm.
just go back to like, what's the lesson for us, right? Because maybe we're not running like a 100,000 person bank,
Yeah.
but we're running a small or mid-sized startup or scale up. But we still have
Mm.
to answer the same question. Why would someone come work for you? Why would someone engage in their work? So why would they do their very best work? Why would they emotionally commit to you? And why would they stay with your company? And in that, it has to be a good exchange of what you offer versus what I get in return, right? And so that's where we have to design something that we would call like an employer value proposition, right? So what is it that you offer to an employee that makes it attractive for me to join you and to stay with you, right? And of course, when you're attracting talent, you can still talk about, you can basically do a sales pitch and tell them, oh, your startup is so great to work for, it's so fun, work hard, play hard, you get competitive salary, you get good benefits, whatever. And those things can help in attracting people. But then after 6 months, they know the truth. They know what it's
Yeah.
like to work for you. They know the good and the bad. What's going to keep
Yeah.
them in your company? So it has to be a good value exchange. There has to be something there for people to say, I'm going to stick with this company. I'm going to go on that journey with them, right? And that's where all these things start to matter a lot more. Because again, if you're this like dictator who says to people, show up at this time and do the work in this way, it just doesn't gel with how people work nowadays, right? And then you're going to lose great talent. They're going to go to another startup. And then what are you going to do? Hire more people? No. And then you have to onboard them again. You have to teach them how your company works, how your product works. You have to instill the culture in them, right? That's a terrible thing for companies to do.
Yep, that sounds tiring.
It is
We do.
tiring. We know it. It is tiring.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well said, Dan. Well said. I really appreciate your point of view. And again, I agree with you. So that's this podcast host is not challenging the guest enough.
Title of the podcast. I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Because they make sense.
Yeah,
I think that's the whole point, right, Ruby? Like it's not about like, being an advocate for something I think is fine,
yeah,
but like it's not about some cause or about something that we need to persuade people. We just need to go back to first principles. We just need to think logically.
yeah,
Companies don't work without people. How do you
yeah,
get the best people? How do you keep the best people?
yeah,
Has to be a fair exchange.
yeah,
Has to be good value for people to want to join and for people
yeah.
to want to stay. And again, it's so costly for companies to have that kind of revolving door of talent, right? Of people
Mm.
who try it out for 6 months or 12 months and then leave again. You cannot run a business
Yep,
like that.
yep,
All
yep.
your value is in the people in your company. It doesn't work like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
At least 2 or 3 people.
and the AI. um, that's awesome, Dan. One important part of this podcast is I always ask my guests about the worst failure that they have, and so you can't dodge this question. Um, so yeah, tell us about the worst failure that you have, something that's left you a scar, and or doesn't leave you a scar, but is redefine you as an entrepreneur.
So I think I answered the question before already, which is basically that it's just like when you're pursuing the wrong incentive, right? When you're going for something that's not aligned with what actually makes you happy, right? And so that's the whole trap of, you know, I saw the headlines, right? I saw in the media these success stories of this company raised this much money and grew to this size and is doing this or that, right? And so it's definitely something I fell for, definitely something that I also saw as very glamorous, right? And maybe again, in a way for me to prove my worth or a way to prove my value, right? Then when I pursue it, I realized like, oh, that doesn't fit with me at all. Which again, if I just looked deeply earlier, I could have known that beforehand. But again, sometimes we have to make the mistake to get the lesson. But that doesn't fit me at all. And that's why now I'm working so happily with like a really small core team of people that I've been working with for years that I really trust. And that I also, again, just for myself, I really enjoy working with. That model totally works for me. But I've definitely learned the hard way that for me, the idea of like building a big company and managing a big business is not what's going to make me happy. It's not at all. And so that's definitely my biggest failure is to pursue that, even though deep down inside, I would have already known that that doesn't fit me. It's not my thing.
I see. Beautifully put. And so just to end this interview, I want to ask one last question, just for fun. Um, and
Fun.
we're going to end it with the future of work, right? So if I can hire all the billboards on earth and display your one message about the future of work to everyone, what would that one message be?
One message.
Yeah, on a billboard. You've been in advertising before, right? You know how it works.
True. Okay, I probably wouldn't put a message, but I would put a question.
Mm-hmm.
And that is it worth it? And actually, in our company, we say, is it fun? But I would say for the broader public, I would say, is it worth it? And I think our time on earth is so incredibly short that I really think that people should ask themselves much more and much more often, is it worth it? Because we can get blinded by the wrong incentives and we could get really hung up on like, oh, our company needs to achieve this or we need to achieve this. But if it turns out you only have 2 weeks to live, or if it turns out that maybe people around you have only a limited time to live, which we all have limited time, but let's say more limited time, right? Is that really the thing that you want to be doing with your time? Is that really worth it? And so that's the question I will put on the billboard to, if people drive by it, to just quickly reflect on like, hey, wait a minute, how I'm spending my time today, what I'm doing right now, is that worth it? In the big scheme of things, is it worth it? If not, quickly redirect, quickly pivot.
Ah, wow, so philosophical, beautifully that's a beautiful ending to this podcast episode. Thank you so much, Dan, for your time. I hope this podcast is worth it for you. It's totally worth it for me. Also, it's lovely to talk to you and learn from you and your perspective. All the best.
Thank you so much, and pleasure as always to talk.
All right, I'll let you go.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, bye bye.
Hey, những người bạn doanh nhân của Zero to X. Chương trình podcast này được làm với rất nhiều tình yêu từ bản thân mình và những người trong team của mình. Tất cả mọi người đều tình nguyện thời gian của họ. Nếu bạn thích chương trình này thì hãy mua tặng tụi mình một ly cà phê. Tụi mình đều là những con nghiện cà phê. Nếu có sự ủng hộ của bạn thì tụi mình sẽ làm ra những tập podcast mới phê hơn nữa. Hãy check out link ở trong description nha.